Alright, so here I'm at the thickness planer, and since everybody doesn't probably have one of these, I'm going to show you kind of a couple quick things about how to use this planer. So basically over here, it's a little dusty, this is going to be the depth that you want to get to your piece of lumber. So that's what this red gauge is, and it's in inches. And this lever here moves this planer up or down. As you can tell, it's lowering right now. Once I get low enough, this gauge here is at 0 currently. I will eventually come and touch this piece of wood, and as you can tell here, it says material removal gauge. That removal gauge coincides with this marking here. When this mark moves up, that's how much material you're going to remove from your board. So you lower it down, it'll start to touch. And as you can tell, if you watch this red gauge, it'll move up. See? So it's almost at the top. The first pass, these are have different markings. So you have 0, which obviously means you're not going to take off any material. And then you have a mark between 0 and the first line, which is 1/32. I always go to the first 1/32 mark to start out with. This here, once you get your depth set, this locks it in place. When you run the planer, you want to make sure you have your hand on this so you're pushing pressure, because sometimes if you have a board that has a cup in it, it can cause this to pop open, and that could change your depth adjustment and not plane it completely flat. So I always hold on to this as I push it through. The other thing is this has a dust port. So I actually have just a vacuum cleaner, and I'm going to hook that up to it. It's going to get a little noisy, but that's basically how you utilize this thickness planer. You'll run it through, it'll come out on the other end, and you'll just keep moving it down. With this planer, I know after I run one piece of board through, I can lift this up. Wherever that, let's say I'm at here, I can move it 1/4 turn. And then run the next one through. Move it a 1/4 turn, run the next one through. Move it a 1/4 turn until I get my desired width, or sorry, thickness of the board I want. So we'll move it back. We'll lock it in, and then we'll run this planer. And you really need to test the braking system if you're running this planer, because if you don't, you're going to have 6 inches of chips or so. Alright, sorry about that. So, my camera died, it filled full up of memory, so I didn't get the planing process, but as you can tell I have a lot of chips here. So basically I just kept running the boards through this. I would lift it up just like I explained that process, clamp it back down after I moved it a 1/4 turn or a 1/2 turn, and then this is the end result on both sides. So, it's nice and plain. We know that these cut are square. So basically we're done with that planing process. So there's a bunch of chips in here, so I'm going to have to get this cleaned up. But let me just push it over here. Just so I can kind of give you a quick idea of what they'll look like. So right now, without anything else done to them, they're pretty darn close for glue up. So there's some lines. So here it's fairly tight. And as you move farther away, they get looser and looser and looser. So normally the next process, like this is a fairly nice tight joint between the two, is I will put these in my vise, and then after I have them in my vise, I will simply take a hand plane there. I'll stick these on edge, and I will take the hand plane and hand plane them out. And the easiest way is I take a straight edge and I put it the length of the board here, and I'll look for daylight. Wherever I have daylight, I know that either my edges here are high, or if it's tight here and I have daylight on the corners here, then I know that the middle is thicker and I need to take material out of the center. So, but basically they're pretty much done. They're ready to be glued up, and there's your shelf. So not bad. You're gonna have to do, after you do get them completely planed flat, I'll stick them on edge. I have a doweling jig, and then I just put about 4 to 5 holes in every single board here, and I'll show you that process later as we move along. But I'm gonna go ahead and hand plane these. And if you haven't used a hand plane, you should probably look up some other videos. I'm not the best at this hand plane. I just received it probably about a week ago. But so I'm not going to record that process, but I'll show you a video after I get them hand planed and they're ready to be set up for the next process, where I can get my doweling jig, and I'll show you how I put dowels inside these boards here to mate them up to each other. So all right, we'll be back after that. Okay, so here we are after I've hand planed them. As you can tell, they're pretty darn tight. So these boards here are used so I don't rough up the edges with these clamps, because they're just metal on metal. So these are just allowing me to apply even pressure to it. I always do a dry clamp up process to make sure I like the gaps and that they look really good. Once I've decided I like that, I mark the boards here with numbers. We're going to sand these down anyhow. So that one's number 1, that one's number 2, and this one's number 3. So the reason why you leave excess on your boards when you're making any type of glue up like this is, like I said, I'm going to have these as 23 inches, but I cut them at 24. Well, if you look here at the edge, there we go, that's a good picture. There's a gap there, and that's from the cupping of the boards. And you'll get that on pretty much any type of glue up you do of these. I have yet to see a board in pine that is completely straight and you will not have this. So I've had this on pretty much every pine glue up I've had, and usually I leave about an inch, inch and a half extra, and you'll just go ahead and cut this portion off. And that's why I leave excess. And matter of fact, I would probably even go as far as to say leave 2 inches extra, because that's pretty far. You know, if I was to take a tape measure, yeah, it's about 1.25 inches is about what that is. So you'll still see a very tiny bit of it, but I'm hoping by the time I sand it, it'll pretty much be invisible. But that's kind of why you always want to cut it to rough specifications. Leave a little extra, because when you go to clamp them up in this process, they're not going to be 100% straight. So this side looks really great, but this side, like I said, there's always it's just bound to happen. So just be safe. Leave yourself with a little extra room. You don't want to go through all this work and plane them and get them all the way glued up to realize, wow, that looks horrible because now I have a big gap sitting here. And by the time you stain it, it's probably, to be honest, not that noticeable. And especially on a shelf, you're going to put items on it. But, you know, if you're doing the work, you're going to know it's there. And really, that's what matters. So just save yourself some work later down the road. Leave yourself with a little bit extra lumber. And that way you don't have that problem after you go to cut it, because you can always take this on the table saw after you're done and you can cut it to the length that you want. So the next step is we're going to take this into the doweling jig, and the reason why I numbered these is after I've put my jig together and I drilled the holes, we're going to mate them up in this position. I like the way they look, I like the way the pattern is, and so I number them accordingly. And actually what I usually do is go like this. That way I know that this one needs the board made up with this one here and vice versa. So I'll show you the next process.